Hello, and welcome to Talking About Regeneration, the podcast that's all about stem cell and regenerative medicine and some other stuff too. I'm Kevin McCormack, Communications Director at CIRM. We're California's stem cell agency, and we have $5.5 billion to change the world. And this podcast will introduce you to some of the people who are going to help us do just that. Enjoy the show. Our guests today are two of my favorite CIRM board members, so I hope none of the other 30 odd members are watching. Not that they're odd, really. Anyway, this pair come from very different backgrounds with very different experiences, but both share a very common purpose, which is to raise awareness about two disabling conditions. Lauren Miller Rogen is an actress, screenwriter, and director, as well as being an amateur pottery maker. She has starred in the movies Superbad and 50/50 and co-wrote and starred in the movie For a Good Time Call, which is actually a really funny movie. So if you haven't seen it, you should. But she's on the CIRM board because she's also an activist committed to raising awareness about Alzheimer's disease. Dr. David Higgins has a PhD in molecular biology and genetics, which I was actually going to do, but then I switched to politics. In his career, he has worked at several biotech companies, served as an associate professor of biology at San Diego State University. He's also the coordinator of the University of California, San Diego Parkinson's Disease Support Group Network. And it's his work on Parkinson's disease that has brought him to the CIRM board. Welcome both of you to Talking About Regeneration podcast, and we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Thank you. Lauren, let's start with you if we can. A lot of Hollywood celebrities choose a cause to highlight, but for you, your work in Alzheimer's is really very personal, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, early on, I would, along with my husband, we would, attend certain events and they, donate to this or that. But, it wasn't until, unfortunately, Alzheimer's touched my life with my mom that we really found a personal drive to move the needle in that space. And, I think that it's always good to care about certain things, but when it's personal, you can really dive deep and get behind something. So that's how we got involved, because it was very personal.
David, like Lauren, your work with Parkinson's also has a very personal aspect to it. Can you talk about that?
Yes, and yes, it does. I have I think of my family as kind of being the royal family for Parkinson's. My mother had Parkinson's, died from Lewy body dementia in 2014. Her mother, my grandmother, had Parkinson's, and in the 1960s, was one of the first human beings in trials to test levodopa for Parkinson's disease. My uncle, my mother's brother, had Parkinson's, and my great uncle, my grandmother's brother, had Parkinson's. And in December 2011, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's myself. So yeah, we have a rich history of this disease.
Did you have any idea before the final diagnosis that was what was possibly happening?
No, but in retrospect, it probably made that process go faster. It probably made a lot of people I hear when they go through the process of being diagnosed with Parkinson's, it lasts months or in some cases years. And for me, I had a very good primary care physician who sent me to a neurologist very quickly, and we figured it out in about 3 months. So it wasn't too bad.
Right, and as someone who's seen the disease progress, I mean, that must have been quite disturbing.
It is, because the first thing anybody thinks is, there go I. I mean, that's me. And of course, when you dig down into it and learn more about it, nothing could be further from the truth. Everybody is so different that there's almost no way to look at one person and say anything intelligent about the other person. So that's sort of good and bad. I mean, you'd like to know what's coming, of course, but if you see someone who's particularly disabled, you'd like to know that that's not necessarily going to become you.
Right. So Lauren, you are more than just an activist. I mean, you started Hilarity for Charity. You do a lot of fundraising to raise money for research and also raising awareness. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So, when my mom was first diagnosed, and David, I like that term. I think can my family be the royal family of Alzheimer's? Because, both of my mom's parents had it. My uncle had it. My great aunt and my great uncle on my mom's side They were actually diagnosed with Parkinson's. So, maybe we can, be royal together there with that great honor. But, for us, I just couldn't not talk about it. When my mom was first diagnosed, she was really afraid and didn't want me to talk about it. And I kept it a secret and I didn't tell people for a long time. And I'm a storyteller, and it really hurt me to do that. And eventually my mom was advanced enough that I just couldn't not talk about it. So we started talking about it, and eventually we threw an event and thought, let's raise some money. And through that, we started being contacted by younger people who were appreciative that as younger people, we were talking about a disease that is often thought of to affect older people. And of course it does, with its diagnostics, but both of, these diseases are diseases that affect the entire family. And so, I was 8 when my grandfather was died, or 12 when he passed away, and 19, my grandmother passed away, and then 24 when my mom was diagnosed. So, this has affected my whole life. So that sort of just started to inform the idea that perhaps we could do more than just a single event, and we could create a space for young people to find their voice in this disease. And that was in 2012. And, next year will be our 10-year anniversary. And, we created in 2017, we became our own 501c3 nonprofit. And, we've raised millions of dollars and worked with thousands of people and provided care for thousands. And, we realized that, it was more than just a one-off event, that we really wanted to turn our personal situation into something that could continue to help people today and tomorrow. My dog is barking. I will tell her.
Of course, it wouldn't be a podcast without a dog. So why comedy though? Why did you choose that route for something that really is very serious?
I guess Alzheimer's is not funny. But my husband and I both work in comedy, we're filmmakers and storytellers. And I think that, we sort of touched on this in the beginning. I think that when you can make something personal, my husband has said before, like if we were bakers and it wouldn't have been called hilarity for charity, it would have been called baking for charity. And I think that, when you can make it personal, when you do what you're already good at, what you're already doing, and turn that into something good, it can feel really authentic. And so, for us, that's what we do. That's who we know. That's who we can bring together, our comedians, and we can, in a way, like bring light to a disease that is dark with the comedy.
Absolutely.
I'm going to tell her to
have you found through that more people open up to you? Because I think increasingly there are more and more people who have this in their family, certainly in my family, my mother and several of my aunts.
Yeah.
And you feel the need to be open about this because there's nothing shameful about it. But I think a lot of people are scared sometimes. Has this helped people open up to you about it?
Oh my gosh.
It's far more common, I think, than most people think about.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, like I said, when my mom was first diagnosed, she was terrified, embarrassed. She had, so many stories in her head, of course, of her parents, like as David mentioned, and she didn't want even family members to know. And so, as I started talking about it, there's always been a hesitation from people to share their story, or, a slight reaction to the way that we would be so bold and brash and honest about it. Everything was very polite. Fundraisers are very formal and very sophisticated, whereas we were the ones who came out and were like, fuck Alzheimer's. Like, this is a terrible disease. Can I say that to the podcast, right? You can bleep it. And I think that people have really appreciated that. And I have noticed a great shift in the conversation around Alzheimer's and brains in general in the last 10 years that I've been a part of the conversation. The brain is scary, and science, as far as other major diseases, brain diseases have been underfunded and they've fallen behind other major diseases. And so I get why we're scared about it. But science in the last 10 years, 5 years has been tremendous with the brain, and the potential for the next 5, 10, 15 years is even more unbelievably full of hope. And so I think the conversation is changing immensely around that, just because it's becoming more normalized. And part of, that comes from the government giving more funding to neurological diseases. The fact that CIRM is, recognized that a huge chunk of our next round should be focused toward the brain. And I think that's given people a lot of hope, and the people who were afraid to talk about it before are now doing it.
Right, right. So as patient advocates for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, you both bring a very particular perspective to the board. And so why do you think it's important to have patient advocates help guide some of these decisions?
I'll let David take that one.
Before I answer that, I want to follow up on something that Lauren said. I think is very important, and that's this fear of neurology or the brain or whatever. And why is that? Why isn't it just a kidney or a liver or a stomach? And I think the reason is because we associate the brain with the soul. Mm-hmm. That's where your
yes,
inanimate being is. And I think there's a sense of you don't touch that. You don't mess with that, because that's what's going to go to heaven, or that's whatever you believe, whatever your religion is. So I think that's one of the reasons that neurology has been so difficult. The other is why patient advocates. I'll give you the pat answer, and then I'll give you the real answer. Patient advocates bring to the table a perspective that only someone close to the disease could have, whether it's a care partner or a person with a disease. As the saying goes, if you want a seat, you have to fight for a seat at the table, because if you don't have a seat at the table, you're going to be on the menu. And that's generally true. But that's the pat answer. The real answer is, if you've ever, as a patient advocate, walked into a room of scientists or politicians or policymakers, and they know you're a patient advocate, the room gets quiet. People are scared shitless of patient advocates. And that's because of the good work of people like Lauren and other organizations, where you do scare the shit out of them. You want to, because you want them to have an emotional experience, not just a theoretical experience. So I think we do a good job in general of making people humanize what's going on, and that there, but for the grace of God, go I.
Mm-hmm. I would have to say I was really surprised when I first joined CIRM and was talking to some of the researchers and realized they'd been working on a particular condition for years and years, decades in some cases, and they'd never met one of the people who has that condition. And I thought, how can you do that? How can you not want to meet the people who have the very thing you're trying to fix? And that always surprised me. So when you talk about patient advocates walking in the room and scaring these people shitless, absolutely. I think it's because they're face to face with something, and it's easier to work in the abstract rather than look and think, I'm working for this person.
Yeah, for sure. I remember a couple of years ago, I had a sort of talk with the Bridges students, and and obviously they're working on a number of different projects, but there were a handful of them who didn't have experience with Alzheimer's disease. Right. That wasn't an area that they had even thought of going into. And it is all a symptom of, I think, what David so smartly said. There is this fear, this untouchable, sort of, you put the brain on a pedestal of, oh, we can't do anything about it. And that's just it's not reality at this point.
No.
Right. And so for some of our listeners who may not know, our Bridges program is where we fund internships with undergraduate or master level students to get hands-on experience, real world experience, working in a stem cell laboratory, working with real scientists and getting a sense of what the future could be. And because of that disconnect, Lauren, we've actually started requiring them to do at least one patient advocate event while they're doing that internship, because it's that connection. It's the need for them to see what's really happening with people, what's really happening in a particular disease in a real world setting, rather than just in some kind of abstract lab setting that really has a big influence, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So and to just expand that just slightly, and to have people like Lauren, who people recognize and know who she is, and they trust her, whether they know her or not, and she's got credibility, and she comes to the table with, oh, if she said that, that must be true. And it's a huge responsibility. And I wouldn't trade places with her for $1 million, but she does such a good job of it. And she's so credible that that's what a patient advocate should look like. She doesn't have to be, she doesn't have to have Alzheimer's. She can represent Alzheimer's. She's been through, in some ways, the harder pain of Alzheimer's. I mean, a patient with Alzheimer's, advanced Alzheimer's, probably isn't suffering a whole lot. Lauren still is suffering a lot when her mother is at end-stage Alzheimer's, et cetera. So I don't know, Lauren, if I'm speaking for you, but that's my impression.
Saying that. Thanks for saying that. And I could say just the same about you from the meetings. And, I think that, hearing from people who are touched by it is what moves the needle. And, going back to sort of the beginning, which is like, when you normalize something, more people talk about it, and then change happens. It's why we're at a place where there's hope. When everything was a secret 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, there was no hope.
So is there ever a temptation, though, when you're sitting on the board and a project comes up for Parkinson's or Alzheimer's to be funded, and the recommendation from our working group is saying, it's not so great. Is there ever a temptation just to say, let's give it a shot?
I mean, there weren't a ton with Alzheimer's in the last, 5 years or so. There were a few, and there was one in particular, and we didn't have a huge discussion. I think it was recommended. There was one, I want to say, that we were sort of split on, and I feel like maybe both David and I said something. The one that I'm thinking of was funded. So
yes, there's always a temptation to try to push something forward, but I keep telling myself, and it's really hard being on the board, because you answer to two authorities, that your constituents and the rest of the board. But I always tell people, you're not doing patients any favor at all by funding bad science, period. Doesn't matter how or why it's bad. If it's bad for everybody.
That's true. And I know that the temptation is there, but obviously we want to use the funds as wisely as we can to be able to fund good science, even if it's not in that specific area, but that something may help someone else, obviously.
And what if Lauren went out one day and advocated snake oil for a treatment for Alzheimer's? How long would she last as an advocate? She would lose her credibility, and then her power is gone, her influence is gone, and we can't do that.
But she's such a good actress, I'd believe her.
Snake oil is great. You heard it here first.
It must be frustrating for both of you, seeing the progress that's being made in some areas, and yet for both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, it seems to be going so much slower than we hoped it would.
Not anymore.
Yeah, we're catching up. Yeah. I would say, when I first started, I would be irate. I would look like the NIH numbers and be come on, heart disease, HIV, cancer, those numbers are going down, and we're going. But overall, there is a shift, and the numbers are changing of funding, I would say, not necessarily, the deaths from Alzheimer's, it's the only disease in the top 10 causes of death that can't be prevented or slowed or cured. That hasn't changed, unfortunately. But in my opinion, the energy, the funding has changed and is drastically different, even from 2-3 years ago.
I agree with that. And I would also add that the collaborative environment between Parkinson's and Alzheimer's has gotten to be way more sophisticated than it ever was before. So people are recognizing that what you're doing, you don't have to keep it in a box and keep it a secret. The collaboration is what's going to make us make leaps forward.
Totally. For sure. Yeah. Just the conversation again, the brain is just becoming less stigmatized. I mean, not just diseases like this, but overall, mental health is a conversation that has entered the scene in the last few years in a way that it never had before.
That's right.
So, I think it's shifting just overall in a good way.
And we're part of that shift. I think that's an important thing to remember too. CIRM funds research, and that's important. But we also can, things like this, we can, with some authority, we can teach the public that their money is being well spent. It's important work that's being done, and it probably, most likely, especially for Alzheimer's, it probably is going to have an effect on somebody you know before long.
Yes, for
That's
sure.
great. So Lauren, like you, I don't have a science background, and I know how
Mhm.
challenging it can be sometimes to try and keep up with what's going on at the board. I mean, the level of discussion can be quite dense. How do you manage that?
Well, I'm very intimidated always at the meetings, but I manage it by listening to the smart people. It's hard for me to sort of look at the materials we get sent ahead of time and the breakdowns of the studies, and a lot of that is just a total foreign language to me. Luckily, there are smart people on the board, on the science advisory board, all of that. They are guiding the science. So luckily I have people who do understand the science that I can listen to. And then and I can certainly understand the more administrative things that we talk about,
Mhm.
but luckily, surrounded by smart people, I can sort of just lean on them when it comes to the science. Cause I'm like, what?
And the key for somebody like you is that you hold those people credible and you have respect for their opinions. So you don't just randomly accept things. You can evaluate the speaker, not just the content.
Yeah, try to.
I've always found, from my perspective, it's like I ask the stupid questions so no one else has to. Like, what does that mean? How does that work?
Oh God, if I asked that every time I didn't understand what something meant or how it worked, we would never get through any of these meetings.
Scientists have a touch of arrogance in them too. They like to be able to talk and say, "Oh, you can't understand a word I'm saying."
Well, it's like the law, isn't it? It's a whole other language. And I
Yeah.
think if you exist in that world all the time, it's easy enough to use that. But for the rest of us who are trying to kind of understand what you're talking about, we need to kind of simplify it and make it more accessible.
In my mind, the highest compliment a scientist could be paid is that if they have the ability to translate information, not dumb it down, translate it into something that's understandable by an average smart layperson. That's incredibly difficult to do, but that's something that we have to do.
Yeah. And that's something that you do really well, David. You really make it very accessible. And I remember something you said a few years ago that really has stuck with me, which is like, if you look at some of the Parkinson's research that's out there, and it seems to focus an awful lot on dyskinesia, on the muscles, the trembling, the shaking. But if you ask a Parkinson's patient, someone who has Parkinson's, what are the issues that are most important to them? It's a whole different series of issues.
Yeah, I'll say, David, you're one of the people who speaks in real words, and I think it is the fact that you wear both hats. You have a science hat and a patient hat, and sometimes JT will open up to like board comment, and I'm like, oh no, here we go with 20 minutes of me having no idea what people are saying. But then someone like David or a few others, I'll be like, oh, thank God. Here comes someone, I'll understand what they're saying. I didn't understand the last 5 minutes, but now I'll get it.
We're working on a Google Translate program for people like you and me, Lauren, so that'd be really good.
Please, we get maybe some subtitles at the
I love it. It's a great idea.
So David, you're also very active in the UC San Diego Parkinson's support group. Why is that important? Why do you feel that it's really important for people with diseases like this and their families and caregivers to have these support groups to help them?
The number one reason is education. What happens to anybody diagnosed with any disease is you go through a fairly rigorous hands-on process of being diagnosed and told what you've got and what the treatment regimen is going to be. And then it's hi, bye, I'll see you in 6 months. What we do is we catch those people as they come off that conveyor belt, and we continue to be a source of education. If they don't know what the little yellow pill does, we teach them what the little yellow pill does. Our goal is to take away the stigma associated with the science of the disease so that patients neither feel intimidated nor uneducated when they want to talk to their physicians. So get them so that they can talk to their physicians, achieves two things. One, it gives them self-confidence, but it also gives them the ability to get information that they might not otherwise get.
Yeah.
It is incredibly rewarding to be in a room of 60, 70, 80 people, all of whom have Parkinson's disease. And you just go, wow.
Yeah. Okay. All right, you two. Here's where things get tricky. You're both dog lovers. What's
Yes.
the best breed?
Um,
Cavalier King Charles, obviously.
I have a chocolate lab that is the sweetest, most unbelievably kind dog I've ever met.
Mhm.
Just unbelievable.
You're wrong. It's a French sheepdog because I've got one. Okay.
Oh, okay.
if you weren't an actress, writer, director, and this is for you, David, what would you be? What would you be, Lauren?
I think I would like run or try to like create hotels. You know, when I was a kid, I used to like when I would play pretend, I had like a fake cruise line with a friend of mine
Really?
and we had a lot of like a binder with reservations and activities and all, I think I maybe would be like a something like that.
Unbelievable creativity.
I like that. I like that. David, what about you? If you weren't a scientist?
I was going to be a scientist from the age of 6. It was just what kind of scientist. I thought I was going to be a marine biologist, and I went through all that, and it just ended up liking genetics so well that I went in that direction. So there isn't anything about my career path or personal path or anything that I would change.
That's great. That's a lovely thing to be able to say, isn't it? So David, I know you and your husband like to travel. Where's your next trip?
Oh boy, as long as nobody's listening, literally our next trip is we're going on a driving trip up to Mendocino with all 3 dogs for a week. But until the pandemic came along, we were headed for Ireland. And our last trip that we actually took was we went to Cuba for a week, which was very
That's cool. Mendocino is
great.
very Irish-like. I mean, green and rolling, and so
It's
it's
fun?
lovely. Yeah,
You mean
and Ireland will be still there. I'm going there in the fall, so I'll bring you a report back and let you know how things are
Fantastic.
going.
It's still top of my list, Ireland and Wales.
All right.
Yeah.
Lauren, what about you and Seth? Where are you planning to go?
Oh gosh, we both have a lot of work that's keeping us home for a while. Not that we mind that, because in normal life we travel a lot, and I certainly have not been this stationary ever in my entire life.
Did you enjoy it? What was
So much. Honestly, I don't ever want to leave my house again, and I will. But no, we had a trip to Italy to go do pottery that we had to cancel, unfortunately, during the pandemic. That we were really looking forward to, and we will, once work figures itself out, we'll do that one again. We're going to go do a workshop in Florence.
Oh,
So
Florence.
one day we'll do that one.
Not too shabby. Not too
Yeah,
shabby.
not too shabby.
Anyway, thank you both for taking the time to talk today. It's been great fun. I've learned a lot about you, a lot about the way you get the role of the patient advocate and how important it is in everything that we do at CIRM. So thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed it.
Kevin, thank you for bringing the light to CIRM and letting the world know what CIRM does and why it's valuable and why we should be excited about it. And I think I say this at the end of every talk I give. You should be proud to be a Californian and proud of the fact that you're helping to fund this organization.
For
Absolutely.
sure. Honestly, I ditto to that. I couldn't say it better myself. So ditto.
Okay. So thank you both, and thank you at home or in the car or wherever you're listening. I'm Kevin McCormick, and we'll see you again on another edition of Talking About Regeneration.